Um, Thanks again for all of you joining me here today on the New Technology Trends panel. We have a distinguished group here. And why don't we get started by just introducing ourselves? So, if you can, just go ahead and let's start started perhaps with Joe, and then Roman, and then Matt, and then Luke.
Sure. Thanks, Oliver. So, hey, everyone, I'm Joe Wolfel. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called TerraDepth. And we're out to go get ocean data on scale, faster, cheaper, greener, better than anybody else in the world, so people can make better decisions about what we do and don't do with the ocean. So, we're doing that by building robotic fleets on scale, putting them in the ocean, getting the data. We put it on a cloud platform that we built ourselves, and we sell it. Personal background as far as concerns why I'm here in vets in tech. Yeah, so I'm a veteran. I was in the Navy. I was a SEAL. Deployments Middle East, Africa. Got out, started working for a general who some of y'all might remember, a guy named Stan McChrystal. Just amazing person. He got a bunch of really great people around him to start a consulting company many years ago now. So I was fortunate enough to be part of that group, and that's where I got my legs under me in business. So started learning about business, started learning about disparate technologies and what they did, what they didn't do, and all that led me to starting TerraDepth. Happy to be here.
That's awesome. I guess I'll go next. I'm Roman Sandoval, CEO and founder of Allosense Incorporated. At Allosense, we design and manufacture advanced sensors and measurement solutions for electric vehicle battery manufacturing. We work with a handful of the largest EV manufacturers to date, and also work with the Department of Defense through our AFWERX Open Topic SBIR contracts. By trade, I'm an engineer. Over the past 15 years, had wonderful opportunities to work at companies such as Apple, Intel, Qualcomm, and most recently Tesla on the Tesla Model 3 ramp. Also worked on night vision goggle systems for the Army Rangers, using sensor fusion capabilities and algorithms on those headsets, as well as creating sensors for nuclear fuel rod scanning and ammunition scanning. Happy to be here.
Yeah, great. I'll jump in. Luke Fisher. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SkyFi. SkyFi is an Earth observation marketplace company. So we partner with satellite operators, drone operators, airplane operators, stratospheric balloon companies, and analytic companies to provide insights, data, and imagery to consumers all over the world. We're available on the web and also on Google and Apple Play stores, so you can download it today. Check it out. And the mission is to really democratize, or we prefer the term, easify the access to this amazing data and technology that we have flying overhead and get it to the masses so people can invoke change in the world. Because there's just amazing analytics and insights you can gain. Very similar to what Joe is doing at TerraDepth, where he's conquering the ocean. We're trying to conquer a little bit higher altitude with it. So skyfi.com for more details. My background, I was an Army aviator on active duty for 16 years, most of that time in the special operations side of the house based in Southern Virginia. I then transferred over to the reserves and worked for a defense innovation unit in the autonomy portfolio. And then the full-time civilian job was at Uber Elevate, which was Uber's electric aviation initiative. Did that for a couple of years, then went over to Joby Aviation, where I worked with building one of those electric aircraft. Then went to the venture world for a little bit with Shield Capital, and then ended up co-founding SkyFi and based in Austin, Texas. So super happy to be here.
And Luke, I'm definitely going to steal easifying ocean data.
Yeah, got to put it in Webster. Yeah.
And Matt, you're the VC on the panel, and you're the J2 Ventures, and just tell us about your background and sort of your firm's thesis and sort of all the interesting best-in-class technologies you guys are looking at and investing in.
Absolutely. Again, hi everyone. So Matt Goldman, retired Air Force. I was one of the early founders of the Defense Innovation Unit. Ran one of its lines of effort focused on human safety, human survivability. biotech and all the user interface toys for all the special people that Joe and Luke played with through DARPA, the IC. As I left the military, I came to work with J2 Ventures. So we're like Oliver said, a dual use national security venture fund. Our core thesis is that some of the most exciting technology in the past 3 to 4 decades was built with, by, or for a governmental problem set. And so when you take commercial companies who have used governmental non-dilutive funding well, what the data shows is that they have a tremendous advantage in the commercial marketplace, both because of the funding, but also because of the customers that they're serving and the problems that they're dealing with. So we at J2 focus on everything from material sciences, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and how those interplay into the cyber world, the space side, and then into the biotech and the health focus. Great to be here.
Great to have you, and I think it's sort of super interesting. Obviously, this is the Vets in Tech conference, and there's so many areas that military veterans and military spouses can potentially get into in this whole new trends high tech arena. So that was great, and we'll go into that a little bit more later on. Can you guys just discuss some of the most significant technology trends that you guys are seeing, maybe specific to what you guys are doing in your industries, but just also sort of their future potential and where you see a lot of this going?
Yeah, I'll jump in right from my standpoint. Obviously, I'm a little biased towards the space industry, hence that's why we started Sky-Fi. But I think if you look back over the decades, there's been a bunch of unlocks for technology. I think most of us in this room remember when the internet kind of became a thing, and we had this idea of what it would be used for, to communicate back and forth, but we had no idea that people would have phones on them, connected at all times, sharing videos. And so that was, I think, one of the really big unlocks. And then, when it comes to space, and, very similar to Joe as well, where this, remote sensing, for our environment and our world, I think space is at this inflection point where, if you look back the last 10 years, there's been about 300 satellites launched a year. In the next 10 years, there's going to be about 1,700. And we have thesis on what space technology be used for. A lot of people think it is for government or national security, but Sky-Fi, we're very focused on the commercial world because there's a lot of value, and you need to get it put into the hands of the masses for that to happen. So, yeah, I think we're looking at this inflection point in space, remote sensing, and bringing that power out to the world. So, that's where I think we're one of the areas for exciting technology.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's appropriate for me to jump in here now because I'm going the opposite direction on this. So we're doing a very similar thing that Luke is, right, from a remote sensing standpoint, as he said. But our tactical problems are a little different, right? So in space, you don't have a lot of the issues that we run into in the ocean, right? So the ocean breaks a lot of stuff just by its nature, by the forces and just the environment, the corrosion, et cetera. And you tend to lose things, which, obviously we never do at Terra depth in the ocean. But the big problem that we face is signal attenuation of the water column. And so what that means is, all this cool space technology that we're launching, the 1,700 satellites, we get about 10 to 20 meters of penetration in the water, and then it just goes black. And so we've actually got to be in the ocean to get meaningful data from it. And so when you start talking about that problem set, you start getting into edge processing and to Matt's point, right? So now we're starting to talk about AI ML, which I'm sure we're going to talk about probably later here. But we also start to get into material science. We start to get into additive manufacturing. We start getting into how do we scale robotics, and how do we scale these very high-priced autonomous underwater vehicles that can go to 300 meters, 1,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 6,000 meter depth, which is full ocean depth. 6,000 meters gets you about 98% of the ocean. And how do we do that cheaply? in a way that's meaningful. And so we've got a lot of work to do on the hardware side of the house. And so what I am seeing, though, from, again, I'm biased, we are starting to see investment start flowing more towards the full stack hardware side of things, whereas traditionally that was really difficult to crack that nut. So yeah, I think at least from my perspective, we're going to start looking at how do we scale uncrewed systems, whether that's aerial, whether that's terrestrial, whether that's sea surface, whether that's subsurface. We're obviously subsurface, and we've got a whole host of problems that are going to need edge compute, advanced materials on scale.
So Luke is applying his technologies in space. Joe is applying his technologies in the ocean. We're applying our technologies and focused in sort of the terrestrial space in manufacturing. And what we've seen as sort of this new trend is that we're reshoring manufacturing back in the United States, even though China right now has the majority of the supply chain of building batteries and packs and things of that sort. About 70% of the supply chain is actually owned by China. But with this sort of new reshoring of manufacturing and the electrification of vehicles, that's sort of where we are. And what we're seeing as far as the new technology trends is that most of the new automobiles that we're seeing are becoming electrified. There's a huge and growing market. That's a $155 billion market growing at 28% CAGR. We're also seeing combat vehicles becoming hybrid electric, and electrified as well. And with all of this sort of demand for electrification, there is a need for more advanced sensors and measurement solutions that we provide and also our competitors provide. But more so than that, these sensors and measurement systems needs to be automated. They need to provide real-time situational awareness and improve the manufacturability of the products in the factory floor. And so that's what we provide as a company.
Matt, anything to add from a VC perspective, or?
I think from our perspective, and honestly, I think Joe, Roman, and Luke are great examples of this. If 10 years ago, someone like Luke had stood up and said, we're going to allow for the easification of hyperspectral imaging that you can task from a satellite, someone like Joe would have left. And someone like Roman would have started, proving why you couldn't do that and how that was a problem for all of the high side issues. The reality, though, is what these three companies, what these three gentlemen are doing is excellent proof of how the commercial industry is coming around to these governmental uses in ways that technology never before allowed us to do. And so, Joe's talking about, the ability to penetrate below 20 meters of ocean. Again, there was a time when everyone said, no, that there's only a limited number of people who would deal with that, even though now the vast majority of the world's internet is run through fiber optic cables that are on the bottom of the ocean floor. And you start getting into the layers of what can these technologies do? How do they do it? And from our side, on the venture side, I think Joe's point is very well taken. There was a shift about 2 years ago to everything in the SaaS model. That if the companies didn't have that exciting kind of compounded ARR, that they weren't the investable nature. And I think what we're seeing now is the return to kind of more of a normalcy where the hardware and the software together are really what drive the equation and what drive the market for changing these technologies for the better. So I think this is very exciting.
Very well put. And somebody just mentioned in the chat, I mean, all of these companies here are sort of, cutting edge, very exciting companies. And again, I have to applaud you guys for being visionaries in your respective industries. I'll be amiss if I didn't ask you this question. Obviously, the artificial intelligence and ChatGPT have been making headlines in our news cycles. Is there a role, or maybe what role does artificial intelligence play in your respective industry, if it does? And how do you see that role evolving over the years?
Yeah, I mean, we're embracing it. I mean, with Chat GPT, specifically, there's still a lot of unknowns. I think it is, very, very much, risky at some levels because we just don't know. The Pandora's box has been opened, and TBD what comes out. But embracing that aspect for everything we do is not really possible, but there's some avenues where it can be used immediately. Customer support, large part of our company is all software engineers. So using, Copilot for coding, Chat GPT, just embracing this to drive forward efficiency at the somewhat menial tasks is very crucial right now. And I think it's inevitable. It'll be kind of creeping in all over the place. But you'd still have to, take a very close look and not assume everything is correct because it still gets lost amongst the errors in the programs. But yeah, you have to embrace it. Is my take.
Yeah, same here. I mean, we've, to Matt's point, we use AI essentially as this unifying technology across both the things that we do out at the edge. So when we're out in the ocean running data collection operations, there's not a whole lot of backhaul there. So the robot's got to be smart enough to understand what it sees. And so we've done a lot of work. We've done two major advancements in subsea autonomous technology. So one is onboard data processing. So does the robot understand what it sees while it's collecting data, and can it basically take that information, parse it, prioritize it, and send it to a remote human operator? So we made that loop, that data processing loop. And then we did autonomous energy recharge, because you've got to be able to basically recharge your own batteries at sea. Otherwise, you're going to have a person sitting there putting the batteries back in, once they get recharged. And so the remote operations that we do really requires a heavy amount of artificial intelligence to try and minimize that human from the operation, specifically on the data processing side. So we're doing a lot of machine learning at the edge. Right now, we're running 2 separate machine learning ensembles on our robot to do object identification, automatic target recognition, essentially. But then we also use AI ML on the back end. So once that data comes back, whether it's in snippets or it's in mass, once we download all the data from the robot's mission, now we're running AI ML in the cloud so that we can reduce human cognitive load. Because even though ocean data is still sparse when we talk about it in general, we talked about the 1,700 satellites, you're pumping out autonomous underwater vehicles in terms of like 2 hands per kind every year. So, that bulk of data though is large, and it's not like you can outsource a lot of the labeling and classification of that data either. So we've done a lot of work on the AI ML side of the house to label data sets, to have the training data sets that we can train our models. And so, for us, whether it's from a data collection standpoint or from a data interaction and consumption standpoint, AI ML is actually essentially serving as a connectivity layer, is how we think about it at Teradep.
Yeah, for us, ChatGPT is incredibly powerful, but we haven't automated the use of it in our sort of work pipeline. But overall, ChatGPT helps answer some of my emails. It helps our team program various device drivers for our customers. So there's different types of hardware that we actually have to interact with using our software called Dash. ChatGPT offers us an ability and capability to actually write device drivers that connect over to our data sensor fabric. But overall, it's not fully automated. We know that it's certainly very powerful. And I think what we're seeing as far as a trend is concerned, when it impacts our work, is that ChatGPT or GPT-4 will be applicable more so in the future, like what NVIDIA had indicated, where it's AI meets the physical sort of technologies. So where I could see AI being more applicable to the things that we're doing in manufacturing is the movement of robotics for assembling batteries, running through improved use cases to improve like yield and quality of battery packs. But yeah, I certainly think that we're in the very beginnings of utilizing AI in the manufacturing floor.
On the venture side, we're seeing the injection of artificial intelligence raising bars across the board. And whether it's on the hardware side in terms of the development, the material side in terms of the identification, we're seeing it in especially the biotech industry in terms of leveraging artificial intelligence for the analysis of the data to refine output. I think from our perspective, the concept of automation anxiety isn't new. It's been around for the better part of 200 years. When they replaced lamp lighting with electricity, everyone freaked out. And I think if we went back to not using electricity, we would have more problems. But on the venture side, the use of artificial intelligence in existing technologies, we're finding it as a tremendous augmentation of what the consumer and the governmental world need and want.
No, great points, guys. I think sort of the interesting takeaway for everyone listening is, I mean, you guys are not only incorporating AI into the core product, as Joe was talking about, just amazing how you can use AI to sort of solve some of the problems that otherwise you cannot solve, but also just in supporting your business, right? So whether it's in customer support or whether it's in marketing or whether it's programmers using, generative AI to help them write better code, I think embracing the technology is sort of key, and it's sort of interesting how a lot of people are embracing it, and maybe some not, right? So in all transparency, I did use ChatGPT to generate most of the questions, okay, for this panel. It's easy like that, right? It just does, and it's funny. It incorporated questions. In fact, this question was generated by ChatGPT, so managed to sneak a question in about generative AI. So just goes to show sort of proof of concept there, proof of concept. But that was great, and I think more, I think we'll see more and more of these business applications. And I think you made a great point there. It's sort of a great challenge, Roman, is sort of getting this automated and sort of integrated into our existing business system. So it's not, sort of a spot solution, but it's a very much integrated part of our business processes. Let's switch topics a little bit. Let's just talk about challenges, right? So you guys, most of you on the panel have had experience in the battlefield and in complicated situations, right? And had to overcome big challenges. And I'm sure in business you've had other big challenges. What are some of the big challenges your companies have faced in scaling, commercializing your technology, or gaining market traction, and how have you been able to overcome those, whether using your background or your skills or something else?
Luke, you've been leading it. Send it.
All right. Yeah, I just don't want to be the guy that goes first every time, but I have to do it. Yeah, I mean, I think right now specifically, Sky5 is relatively young, been around, under a year and a half now, and the fundraising environment has dramatically changed, over that time. Where thanks to really good investors like Matt Goldman from J2, a little shout out there. It is a very challenging time, and I think we're still unsure of what the rest 2023 and probably 2024 looks like for those growth stage companies. So the challenge of companies that really got spoiled over the last couple of years with high valuations, and now are starting to see the consequences of that as they go to raise again, where it's more fiscally constrained environment and a lot of unknown variables at that point. So that is one thing that is very dynamic, very unknown right now, which can cause a lot of business stress for it. So that is a challenge. The other challenge is dealing with this remote hybrid work that we're in, where if you're building something, like if you're building underwater robots like Joe is, I mean, you can't go all remote. With Sky5, we're mainly software, so we mainly can, but it's very much a mix, very much a change of company culture. and having hired people that came from college where they finished out the last year or so in college all remote, and then now going into a full remote job, they're missing out on the experience of being around people and interacting and how to build mission and value. So as a leader, it's, that is a challenge for sure for it. So that's two top of mind right now.
Yeah. So great points. Same. I mean, we still have, we have those challenges too on our end. Maybe one thing I'll add, maybe more from a veteran standpoint specifically, the folks here have been in combat or been to planning schools, or Luke's probably a SAMS and CGSC graduate or something like that, both. but generally what you'll learn is it's the strategic assumptions, or it's the assumption that you're making that you don't know you're making is what kills you, right? And so I was always obsessive about that. I was like, this is something that transfers to business. Yes. And I was right. It does transfer to business. But the assumption I made coming in to this business was, I didn't think we'd have to make our own robots from tip to tail to scale this and get it done. Right. So did a lot of homework, talked to a lot of people. And I thought that the state of the industry was a lot more advanced than it was. And so when we went to go scale, we focused where we thought we needed to, and that was not incorrect. But we got all that done, and we said, okay, let's integrate these technologies into these robots that are excellent out here. And we didn't see that to be possible for a bunch of different reasons. It's not because people aren't smart, and it's not because people aren't doing the wrong thing. It's just that our industry is very laggardy, and the business models are vectored in a lot of ways towards defense. And so, just seeing that happen, being like, yep, that's what I was afraid of. But also having the leadership background, the contingency planning already in place, the ability to go raise funding, the ability to shift focus onto other things that were of value until we could get the kind of funding we needed to be able to build from tip to tail. In this case, that's what saved us. So that was a big one. Just a lack of full vetting of the industry you're getting into.
Yeah, I could certainly agree with both of you in regards to some of those various constraints with building up the business. I think for us, our team is certainly very small, less than 10 people. And just starting a business, I mean, you have to wear a lot of hats, from the financial aspects to fundraising to the engineering, vertical integration, things of that sort. So it does take a lot of time and energy to construct a business and also construct the systems to grow the business. I think one of the problems I've had is in regards to customer acquisition and also founder-led sales. Now, our customer base might be different than most other businesses as well. We work with large enterprises, specifically EV manufacturers. And so the time for closing a commercial contract takes anywhere between 3 to 6 months, also additional site visits as well. In addition to that, also working on procurement with sort of defense agencies, sometimes it takes fairly long. You should expect going through a SBIR process to last anywhere between the time of filing to the time of award, about 3 to 6 months as well. And so customer acquisition and also going through contracting is longer than what I had originally anticipated. But nonetheless, I think once you're able to close POs, purchase orders, and or contracts, it's great. And it's an exciting time to be working with a team and celebrating with a team after all that effort.
And Matt, you see this from a Meta perspective, right? Because as a VC and a trusted advisor of the many portfolio companies you have great visibility into their challenges. So you probably see this at a much larger scale. And what are some of the things that you're seeing from a challenge perspective?
So from a challenge side, I see a few things on the portfolio kind of angle, and I see a few things on the veteran ingestion or injection into the startup community side. On the portfolio side, the biggest issue I see is an over indexing on the concept of public, private, rather than the public-private fusion. And to Roman's point, I run into a lot of companies where their existence is internalized as the quality and quantity of SBIRs and STTRs coming through, rather than opening the aperture for the government funding on top of commercial uses. And it's not that one is always bad and one is always good, but from our side on the venture kind of point of view, there is warmth and excitement in a broader user base. And my personal take on this is, SBIRs, STTRs, OTAs are amazing vehicles that allow you to do things for, the defense world, which is a nice size, big market. But if I'm looking at the three founders on the call and saying you could crush it in the defense world, or you could crush it in the defense world and the commercial world, I'm guessing they're all going to choose B. And it's just a volume thing. The problems are harder. They're more exciting. The resources are bigger. And so I think one of the biggest things is that kind of tunnel vision on the governmental piece, whereas instead of broadening the aperture. On the veteran side, in terms of the transition, one thing I run into frequently is a tremendous amount of angst about jumping into, talking to, interviewing with, and all the veterans I talk to, I mentor. I in my mind, I frame it back to time in uniform. There was a point where you were working with one group and you went to working with another group, and whether that was joint and you crossed uniforms, or whether it was within a particular service and you did another job, and I think there's an undervaluing of the resiliency that effectively we were all put through in those shifts of work product, and whether it needed 3 quals to get on the right vessel or the right ship or the right place or the right plane or the right, there's very similar business equivalents to all of these things. And the same way, if you're joining a team and you walk in and expect to change it on day one, it's going to fail. Whereas the appropriate integration is asking how I can help. All of these things work well in whether in uniform or out of uniform. And so I think one of the problems I see on the veteran ingestion side is this sense of the time in uniform doesn't translate. And I would argue it translates better than most people think. Great points.
And actually, maybe this is a good segue to a question that Joe had, because, I think a lot of people in the audience, would be interested in the answer. And that is, what advice do you have for veterans and who are considering moving into, commercial and specifically into the technology space? What advice would you have for them, based on your experiences, and maybe for you, Roman, just generalize that more. You, like the rest of these guys, young entrepreneur, and they're, many service folks are thinking, hey, I'm young, I want to do this someday. What advice, in general, would you give to perhaps folks who are considering doing a startup in technology spaces similar to your own?
Yeah, I guess since I brought it up, I'll go.
Yeah,
Luke. Yeah, so maybe I'll just dovetail off Matt's last point. So the advice I'd give here would be, you should be thinking deeply about your experiences, right? So you likely have experiences that most of your peers do not have, right? I mean, that just comes with the job in a lot of cases. And that's a double-edged sword. So when you're doing your resume and you're putting down all this awesome stuff you did, people are like, doesn't matter, doesn't apply, doesn't translate, et cetera, right? And that happens all the time. It's been happening for decades. But if you think really deeply about what you've seen and done and experienced and been trained to do, you'll see that there are these very human undercurrents, to Matt's point, right? So, if you were a mid-grade, I'll just go back to Luke, in my experience, if you were a mid-grade special operations officer, you essentially had a purple experience. You had a joint experience. And if you were in the combat years, you became very adept at walking in, rapidly analyzing a problem set, synthesizing what was going on around you, coming up with possible solutions, contingency plans, et cetera, getting a team to move in a certain direction and go do the thing. And if it didn't work, pivot and do something else. And so all those things that I just mentioned actually make you a hell of a good chief operations officer, right? So, and specifically, you're going to be really good at going to a post Series A company who's got a validated product market fit. They've got something that they're selling that people like, and now they've got to scale up, right? So they need command and control, or they need scalable processes, in civilian parlance, so that they can scale up. And so you've got those real kind of nuts and bolts from a deep standpoint. You got to do some thinking though on, hey, what am I really good at? Because not everybody had that specific experience in the military, right? So if you can take it 1 or 2 levels down and connect with what you know and what you did and what you're better at than others from a human standpoint, those human things are going to transfer. It doesn't matter that you don't, you can read the 10-day MBA and get the vocabulary, which is important. You need to do that. So then on the flip side, and then I'll stop talking here because I'm good. I also wouldn't overestimate your influence, I guess, again, to maybe Matt answer my question for me. The civilian world is not the military world.
Luke, do you want to?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Luke, do you want to add to that or build on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's multiple points there on what to do, and just having some humility, coming in where, the world Joe and I came from, and Matt serving, we were leading troops, or responsible for a lot, but that does not mean that, you were in charge of people in the military. So therefore you should be in charge of more people on the civilian side. Leadership and people management are 2 very different things. People management, I think on the, in the civilian sector is somewhat difficult and foreign, because there is different incentives for the people you're working alongside on that. And then it comes down to, just realizing you may have to take a couple steps back. You may have to be an individual contributor. I mean, I got out as a 05, and I was an IC for a while. I was totally fine with it. And I've had, many friends go like, well, I was an 05 and I was a battalion commander, therefore I should, be the CEO of a company. Like maybe, but probably not, because there's a lot of experience you don't have, and you kind of have to grind your teeth, just like when you started on the military. There were certain skills you had that you had to learn, and you just don't know what you don't know. And I think it comes down to, as we're speaking on this transition into the civilian sector, about, figuring out what are you solving for. Some people solve for money. Some people solve for happiness. Those 2 are not equal in what your next job is. And realizing your first job out is probably going to be wrong. You're probably going to think like, this is the job for me, I'm it. And you're going to get there and it's going to suck. And then you're going to have to pivot, like Joe was saying, and figure out what you want to do. So I could ramble on for a lot of this. I think I've got another question I put in there too about some tips there. But yeah, happy to hear what other folks have to say.
Yeah, and Roman, if you can just generalize that. So I think that's just great advice that Joe and Luke had, and they come from a background that makes everything they say really relatable for our audience here. But you and I did not serve in the military, and different lack of a set of experiences here. But at the same time, we can give advice to people who are trying to get in. What would you say are some of those challenges or things people should be aware of getting into high tech at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, full disclaimer, I am not from the military. I wish I had served, but overall, we appreciate all the service and everyone who is in uniform migrating over to this space, which is the technology startup sector, if you will. Overall, I think there's a huge appetite for various startups and businesses to work with veterans. And for us, at least from my perspective, because we work with the DoD, because we do work with the government, we certainly want to have an ethos that supports our veterans. And so I think when you're looking into the market to join a startup, there are opportunities for you to either be an advisor to a company or even work initially perhaps as a contractor before a full-time employee. At least my company provides that kind of offering, because I honestly don't know what the perspective is when you're out and deployed, but I could certainly appreciate the people who have built the skill sets and credibility to be working in a sort of startup business that's focused in tech. I think there are some startups that certainly aren't as great with working with military people. However, overall, I'd say startups like ours are certainly welcoming to incorporate veterans in either our cap table as advisors or as full-time employees in the tech sector. I hope that's helpful.
Very helpful, very helpful. And you know, very encouraging too, you know. Matt, any
So honestly, I think Joe nailed it. You know, if we're thinking about the experience as what we did, what one did, where one did it, I think they're stuck in a talking about it as it happened rather than talking about it as the distilled outcome of it, the skills necessary for it. And a good friend really framed it once as it's the tech, not the use case. You know, the tech of this is the skills to run a team of humans and solve for some of the you know, dangerous outcomes, useful outcomes, hard problems. That's the tech side, and the tech side translates beautifully. The use cases become really convoluted. You know, things that you do in an environment may not translate, but how you did it, why you did it, and the thought process behind it, those in my experience translate great. And there's lots of advice for, you know, for vets coming out in terms of not using acronyms and not using, you know, the training and everything else. I think it's really, if you focus on the underlying aspects that allowed for it to happen. Like, again, Joe's COO analogy is spot on. If you're talking about running and functioning, it goes far beyond rank. It goes far beyond duty title. It goes far beyond the rating. You know, the fact that someone was you know, 16 alpha, which is wonderful and amazing, but at the end of the day, that doesn't translate to the world that Roman understands. And I'm picking on Roman as a non-veteran founder who could communicate with other people. What he wants to hear is how it happened. We had this very large problem. We worked on it together. We solved a problem. We ended up moving X number of humans, X number of dollars, X amount of equipment from point A to point B. That becomes meaningful in terms of how to solve for issues in the business side. And I think as you translate that over, it begins to make more sense. And it's not devaluing anything that was done in theater. It's just translating it into a different verbiage.
Great points, great points. And what I'm going to ask is for the folks in the audience, if you have questions for this group, go ahead and start pasting those in the chat area, and we'll try to pick some of those questions up and cover them. But you know, maybe, you know, Matt, maybe you can, you know, talk about what your predictions are for the next year, you know, next couple of years. And also, I think everyone on this panel is curious. I'm curious as to how the whole, you know, what the current, you know, investing climate is like, right? So as entrepreneurs. I think entrepreneurs have heard, hey, there's some slowdown as VCs process what has happened with SVB. I heard from an entrepreneur yesterday that sort of the word on the street is the next 60 to 90 days are going to be pretty slow as VCs sort of work out some of the issues. So maybe you can speak specifically to that. I'm sure that's of interest to everybody here. And maybe we can ask the people at the same time to post any questions they may have, and we can hopefully pick up one or two of those questions afterwards.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things we're going to see as we go through 2023 into 2024 is an expansion of the funding cycle, in part driven because of the slowdown for the end of 2022, but also because of the more recent jolt from the SVB push. I think what we're finding is there is tremendous capital for companies who are doing amazing work with amazing teams. And I think where we're going to see a constriction in the grouping is if we go from the tier one kind of startups, the seed to Series A, the tier two that may have been easily funded, but was not as successful as the tier one. I think that group is going to have a harder go for this round without consolidating and some belt tightening, basically to show the fundamentals are still there. We're definitely seeing some of the groups that raised in 2021 having a hard time with the kind of the adjustment of their valuation shift, having last raised in a plentiful market and now trying to raise or thinking about potentially raising in a slightly more aggressive, a little grittier kind of time frame. But at the same time, what I'm finding in talking to portfolio companies and talking to potential portfolio companies, the amount of venture funding and resources available to these companies is fairly stable. I think in the wake of SVB, the biggest change is going to be there was one of the major things that SVB did really well was venture debt. And so there's a class of companies, generally it'll be somewhere between Series A and Series B, where they would have historically considered venture debt as an alternative to an additional raise. And I suspect the venture debt option pool will be greatly reduced going for the next year until other banks, and that's just a sheer, the number of banks comfortable with venture debt compared to Silicon Valley Bank was really very small. And so until that settles out, until the assets are readjusted and another bank takes up that mantle, at the same time, I think there are lots of vehicles, whether it's true priced rounds, whether it's safes, whether it's convertible notes, that allow founders and teams to creatively aim for the financing that's needed for their growth. And so I'm optimistic going into the end of 2023 that as the funds that are available for the companies that are truly crushing it, they'll be able to grow nicely.
Very well said. And in fact, we have a whole bunch of questions, and in fact, more questions than we have time, I think. And perhaps what we do is one of the members of the panel will take each question, so we make better use of time. Here's a good question in the QA section. How important have your contacts within the DoD been in your line of work? And I think they're referring more to securing funding, perhaps to your recruiting, but have your contacts in the DoD, maybe other departments of the government, been instrumental and helpful in your business?
Go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead, Luke. You got it.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think just networking overall, sorry, I know I'm jumping in, I'm anxious, but I think a point of networking overall, because I think there was another in the chat as well about, legal, trying to get into that realm. But overall, I think, networking isn't stressed enough. That's how you really get jobs, trying to apply to a job with a, just among hundreds of other people, cold email or cold application is really tough. But the DoD side for funding and contracts, yeah, it's been helpful because it is, for more or less, same rules apply. You have to know people. It makes things a lot easier. You have to be able to stand out. But again, networking is important. Try to go to the events because that's where you pick up information and being genuine about it. So that's it for me.
Yeah, sorry, Oliver. I know we wanted one, but just so you guys know, I mean, it's about credibility for the most part. Like none of my friends have helped us. And you're right. I mean, that's not really a thing. There's rules about that and all. But credibility is important, and candidly, your ability to put up with bureaucratic BS and still retain the ability to function that you learn in the military is a huge deal. So you got to play by the rules. You got to know the rules, and you got to get it done. And there's a lot of rules in doing government contracting. So you're in a good spot.
Yeah, and for us, we participated in different DoD-sponsored events like National Security Innovation Network and SimPropel in New York City in 2022. Networking is certainly something that we've been doing actively, just like what Luke has mentioned. And through our contacts there, they've helped us vet various foreign investors, has helped us navigate the landscape of dual-use investing, things of that sort. So I could certainly say that our contacts and networks that we've worked with in the past are incredibly helpful when navigating investments here in the U.S. and also navigating contracts with the DoD.
Very well said, Luke. I think, I mean, this panel sort of makes that point. I met you through Alex networking. I met Roman at a networking event. Luke invited Joe, as their investor. I mean, it's sort of the networking glue that holds everything together, right? So, I think, one of the things we do at Vets and Tech is really encourage and try to create opportunities for military veterans and military spouses to get into the network, get networking, feel confident enough to go out there and meet people and sort of take advantage of some of these opportunities. So I think we're almost out of time. So just a very quick last question here. And I think, we have LinkedIn information for all of these gentlemen, so you can reach out to them on LinkedIn and network. Okay. Ask them questions, connect, they'll help you. Bringing you back to the AI question, which is, what are there specific things you would see or like to see automated using AI that haven't yet been automated? So, we'll end with that question and then dismiss everyone.
Yeah. So for us, it's pretty easy. Reduced uncertainty with synthetic data sets. I think Luke kind of brought this up to begin with. I mean, the sparseness of data that we're dealing with in the ocean on a relative scale, if we can reduce the concern around using synthetic data sets for machine learning model training, that'd be a big deal.
Yeah, for us, it'd be really great to see a completely lights out production facility for EV manufacturing. And I think AI is going to take and be a strong part in all that.
Luke?
Yeah, I think, definitely what Joe said, the synthesization of data. I go towards, what causes me or the company a lot of energy, and that's, touch points with customers, is a lot of questions, problems, that can be solved, because that's what matters on the customer standpoint is the speed at which you're answering. I think there's some very easy wins to be done there, but the data piece is tremendous. Very same world with what Joe's doing underwater and what we're doing in the air.
On the investment side, I couldn't agree more. This is the synthetic data and digital twinning, both, as the progression of hardware moves forward, I think will be game changing in terms of the ability to develop new technology that leverages the existing hardware or improvements on the hardware from a material standpoint.
Great answers. And again, I would just like to thank this panel for their time, and you know, we had a couple of changes. Matt, thanks for stepping in at the last minute. Joe as well. It's been phenomenal having you guys pitch in, and again, thanks for sharing your perspectives and your successes and challenges with the audience. I'm sure it's much appreciated, and hopefully we'll have some of you or all of you back next year or in some of our other events. So thanks again. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks all.